Okay. When Brenda called me, I was delighted for this opportunity because some things have happened on personal level, community, and national that felt, not just felt, but I have to say was a quantum shift. And the opportunity to share this is very precious. It's sitting right in the middle of something. As a brother spoke about October 7th, and that everything has changed from then. Now, again, we've had another shift where we sensed the spiritual dimension and atmosphere has changed. Simply, logically. We imagine if there's a shift in the spiritual realm of magnitude, does it not make sense that we also should somehow shift? We've talked about this dynamic in the past a number of times. That as we go through the last number of years, I guess, it's just kind of starting with COVID, and then through October 7th and since then, we've noticed that the dynamics of the warfare, and it happened really, it became clear with COVID, was all of a sudden, evidently, undeniably global. We saw it all around the world. News anchors, presidents and prime ministers were saying the same stupid things. They're just repeating the same words. And the point that we have touched on, the question was, so the world has shifted. The spiritual, the nature of the warfare, the nature of the spiritual realm has dramatically, quantumly shifted. Can we point to anything in our lives, either personally or corporately as a body, that has changed? And for the most part, kind of just looking out over the field, we say, no, it hasn't. We're still more or less doing the same things that we've been doing for the last 50 years. Who likes change? But just to leave that, to say, take a deep breath and accept that if something doesn't change, in our lives visibly because the world has changed visibly. If something doesn't change in our corporate interactions, we will have not kept step, and we would be like those who didn't run with the footmen and will not make it when the chariots come. So I say that, dear beloved friends, to gird our minds and our hearts, to prepare ourselves. October 7th, it's funny, I hadn't, it may sound really funny, not kind of used this phrase and looked at this picture in considering what had happened. The wall was breached. The wall was breached in, they say thousands of people came through. And I'm not sure what the exact number was, 20, 30, 40 places where the actual fence was breached. Now, I expect many of you relate in an intercessory framework. And we know that intercession is standing in the gap, interceding, standing in the gap. That gap is a break in the fence, according to the Hebrew there. When God says he's looking for an intercessor, he said he's looking for someone to stand in the place to make up the fence, to be the fence. So there's been a breach in the wall. What is to make up the space, to close it, we have to understand what the breach is. Because if we're going to repent of something, doesn't it need to be specific? Because, well, I'm sorry for everything I've ever done and anything that's ever happened. I mean, okay, there's a heart wanting to shift, but we're not landing on correcting, adjusting what the problem or the breach was about. Now, I've spoken about this, so some of you will remember it. Going back to 1967 and the Six-Day War, when we regained the city after 3,000 years, and we gave the Temple Mount back after 2 hours. The chief rabbi, on the 50th anniversary in 2017 of the 1967 regaining of Jerusalem, when everybody was doing fireworks in Jerusalem and videos and colors on the walls, he said, "This is a grievous day." Mayor Lau, chief rabbi, it's a grievous day because on this day, we lightly esteemed, this wasn't his word, but he basically said, we rejected the place that was most important to God. And essentially, lightly esteemed God's presence. So the years come and the Yom Kippur War comes. And of course, Yom Kippur is about the Temple Mount. It's about God's presence. And the war is a terrible moment. If you've watched the second Golden movie that came out, and they're playing the recordings of the actual recordings of the people in the field and the tank commanders, it's absolutely horrible. to hear what they're saying and what's happening. And we said, this is God's response. I won't even call it a judgment, but just to say it's what we reaped. We said, we don't want your presence. So we came to the Yom Kippur situation and his presence wasn't there. And then 50 years plus a day comes the October 7th breach in the wall. It's connected. The most important point of everything, perhaps, that I could say to you is to understand what the breach is, what the gap is. It's the rejection of God's presence. It's not prioritizing his presence. It's not caring about him personally and how he feels. To close the gap, we will need to do the opposite thing, which is somehow understand what it means and looks like and feels like to prioritize the presence of the Lord. Almost maybe about a month ago, I was impressed with the scripture from Luke 22, verse 31, where the Lord says, Simon, Simon, indeed, Satan has asked for you that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith should not fail. And when you have returned to me, strengthen your brethren. And at the time that this came to me, the Lord was parading before my eyes issues in my life that were not okay. Attitudes, ways of being, ways of thinking, deep things. Some that I hadn't really focused on before, and others that I had seen, but somehow was still somewhat tolerating. And I thought about the sifting process in a deeper way and said, what does that mean? What does that look like? So we take a strainer and we put something through it, right? And we sift out those things that we don't want in there. The stones. And the process of our sanctification, the process of coming closer to the Lord, can be looked at like a progression of strainers where the holes get smaller and smaller. So that certain things that fell through a year ago don't fall through now. Certain things that didn't matter a year ago that we were able to live with, now we can. And understanding the shift in the global spiritual dynamic, that we're dealing with a different level measure of spiritual force that has greater authority. And the way that authority that this demonic forces have that infect our that affect our lives is that they're able to go into our lives and touch smaller and smaller places that bear the imprimatur of darkness. I could feel like I was going through this, and Yonit, myself, each one of us individually in our relationship together. a tree has a part above the ground and below the ground. And I just give you this image that maybe is a little helpful to lay hold of what I'm presenting. So the branches of the tree stretch out. And if it's a normal, healthy tree, the breadth and height of the visible part is equaled by the depth and spread of the root structure. So when I think of the scope of the demonic authority that's been released, I look underneath into our heart that it's able to go deeper. And we're seeing this not just in our lives, but in the lives of close friends. And I share that perhaps to connect with, identify, relate to, maybe you will recognize this in your own lives. If not, it's going to come. You know, we get it first here, and then it spreads out to the rest of the body. Now, when the 6 hostages were murdered, that was something different. That landed in a particular way. That with all of the people that have died over the last months, from soldiers to hostages, this one just swept through the body here, swept through the nation like nothing else that's happened since October 7th. It was like a shot in the solar plexus. Well, a few days ago, this initiative of the beepers and the cell phones happened. And looking at the statistics of the number of people that have died, have been maimed, have been blinded, I mean, as funny as it sounds, my heart is broken, even for what's happened to these people in their, probably the worst thing that's happened is blindness. In their spiritual blindness, they've gone physically blind. Now, in looking at it, and not even going into the how it happened and the amazing stories of what's behind it and all of that, but the feeling of it was, this word in particular was intimate. It was like going into someone's bedroom. It was intimate, into the most intimate places where they were there by themselves and no one was around, and it exploded. And it was pinpointed. There are a few who actually probably picked up the beeper off of a table that it was their father's and they looked at it, but probably 95% of the people that were affected by it were Hamas operatives. It was a pinpoint, intimate incursion. And I felt like it was of the same taste dynamic of this sifting. It's going that deep and that fine and that sensitive into the deepest places of our hearts and minds. What's happened in the enemy, the Holy Spirit, it's not exploding things. but he's coming into our lives. He's calling us into an intimacy greater than anything we've known. And it will require a sifting finer than we've ever known, a separation finer, greater than we've ever known, and a change in our lives, fitting for the moment. Some days ago, I don't remember when it exactly started, but the beginning date was 40 days before Yom Kippur. And the couple that have been brought to the village here, James and Melissa Patton, who have taken over the congregation that's been local in the village that was started by Eric and Terry Morey a million years ago, were impressed by the Lord. I don't know, some of you may know, some of you probably don't, that the community where we live, the Poria Elite, and there's Poria Elite, Poria Nevi Oved, and Poria Kfar Avodah. So there's 3 different communities right next to each other called Poria. And within all of these communities, we have the highest number of believers living anywhere in the land outside of the very messianic Moshav, between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, Yad Shemona. And we've known that God had something for this community that he wanted to bring forth from it. One of the things that's been felt, I mean, the believing presence here goes back 60 years, goes back to the 60s. And that it would be a place of refuge. And knowing all of the history and all of the divisions and the problems that we've had amongst the body here, this couple said, we feel to call to open up our house for the next kind of 40 days. You'll see it's actually 30 in a way, to open up their house from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock in the afternoon every day. And that whoever would come from the community, it's open to the whole community to come. Well, there are a handful of people that are participating, would come and sit 20 minutes or so quiet before the Lord, and then share. And we've been doing that now for it's like 2 weeks. Basically spending an hour, shall we say, half of it silent before the Lord, and half of it sharing anything that we would feel, preferably during that time. I've never been part of anything like this. Exactly. The community, for sure, has never engaged in anything like this. It's in response, clearly, to the shifting that's taking place. And they asked that the last 10 days, which is from between Yom Teruah, Rosh Hashanah as it's known, to Yom Kippur, they do it here in our house in the framework of the worship gatherings that we've been holding twice a week now, started 10 years ago. And felt, I've been waiting for this for 20 years. I've been waiting for, and it's only a handful of people. It's not a big crowd. But for a community initiative of coming before the Lord like this, in silence, without agenda. 20 years ago, we had an outreach into the streets of Tel Aviv. That was, nothing ever has happened since then like that. where we had 300 people every night. It was a music and drama program. We had 300 people every night come to watch it. And out of the 300, 100 walked, several hundred meters to go to the Doogie Coffee House to find out what they saw. And at the end of that, we thought we were going to go full hog out into the streets. And the Lord said, no, it's not time yet. And it was things that needed to be done in the heavens, things that needed to happen on the earth, things that needed to happen within the body. And we feel now we've come to the moment that it's time. We've been praying about now for several months about taking the worship that's happening in our house out into the street. So during Sukkot, in the last 3 days, it's October 21st, 22nd, 23rd, and 23rd is Erev Simchat Torah. On the Jewish calendar, the next day is the anniversary of the massacre. And the Lord has led us to prepare to go out. It's about 18 feet by 30 feet, sort of like a tent, and take all our instruments out and do it for 3 nights out in this field right here in the middle of our village. What we're doing is creating a place, an atmosphere where people can step into it and experience the presence of the Lord. A place that's safe in the midst of this horror that we're in the midst of. A place that's filled with peace and beauty and the sounds of heaven on the instruments of very gifted and anointed people that have been playing together like this for over 10 years. On the personal level, we've experienced a sifting, and things have changed in me and the way I'm looking at situations and people, the way I'm evaluating things. It's been dramatic shift of things that ways I've been for my whole life. And you'll need the same thing. And in the community, we've come together. And somebody used an image about a lightning rod. And imagine, we want the presence of the Lord to come. Okay, we can think of his presence in a lot of terminologies and frameworks, but let's use a lightning rod, that he would come. His presence would come like lightning. Okay, I think we can all flow with that will work. So what do you do if you want lightning? You put up a lightning rod. These 40 days of coming together like this, it's a lightning rod. Our gathering the way we do, been doing it for 10 years, it's a lightning rod. Going out into the street like this for 3 nights, it's a lightning. The exploding beepers has been a game changer. Nothing like this has ever happened. Everybody's afraid out there now. But there will be, we can be pretty sure, there will be repercussions. There will be a kickback from it. Now, it's going to be of global dimension. It's going to the waves that will go out from it will affect everything. We've come, this has been a quantum shift that we will then see. It's like you have an explosion underwater, an eruption underwater, and you end up with a tsunami. Okay, this is what's happened. This is one way I think we can look at this moment. That there's been a release of energy that will produce a tsunami. Will we be ready? It's hard logically to filter through our mind to really grasp the only thing necessary is God's presence. If we can even call it a thing. When he comes and is able to be himself and isn't restricted by our plans and our programs and our thoughts and our ways, if he is able to be free in our midst, everything will happen as it should. The light will go out and expose all of the darkness wherever it is. The healings, the awakenings, it all is a result and a response to the presence of the Lord. Is there anything more important than making for the Lord a dwelling place? Whatever it costs, whatever it looks like, however many people there are, whether it's 3 or 10, put this lightning rod in the ground. If you want a marker for, well, how do we do this? How long? So we've been doing this kind of thing for 10 years, and it's been because of the people involved. Just very rich musically. But mostly people are not going to have such a musical framework. And I'm amazed at what the Lord has done in the community, because we're sitting together with no music. We're doing it with no music. We're sitting in silence for a solid half an hour. It could be longer. And then sharing. I mean, I could say it's easy for me to say do it because we have all this music and it's all this, but here we are now doing it flat empty with nothing. And I can say to you, okay, it works. And it's kind of an interesting thought that I had about it. We have 40 days, but I'm looking at it as one thing. Even if it were 40 continuous hours, think about it in the spirit. It's 40 continuous hours. It's 40 hours. And the Lord wants to do something. Maybe it'll happen in the 36th hour. But what I feel is, and I don't usually say very much in these times, because the sense I've had is, those of you that have been around me at all, you know that I can talk for a bit. I'm presenting myself. Just that. That's my offering. We are presenting ourselves, making a space. I can't impress this strong enough that this is the essence of preparing a place, of putting up the lightning rod, of shifting our dynamic, coming out of the Greek oriented, what do we do and how do we say it, and all of the teaching and all of the wisdom and all of the knowledge and everything, is to put that all aside and sell it all for the presence of the Lord. You know, you'll get it in your head, and then within 15 minutes, you'll lose it. Because the world, everything about it, says the exact opposite. From the church to the world to the messages we hear, that we even hear around where we are all about, again and again and again, what we should do, what we have to do. And I think, give you an example. Of all that I'm saying to you that has to do with manifesting, doing things, and whatever. The number one thing, and it can be the beginning and the end, that I have in my heart to communicate, and I say this, it's the only message I have, really, is the cornerstone of our life, the most important thing of all, is connecting with God's heart, knowing how he feels. What does knowing God mean? Really, what does knowing a person mean? Knowing where they eat, what they do? But it's knowing what's going on in their heart. It's knowing their feelings, their thoughts. That's the same way with the Lord. You know, the beginning of this all for me was like almost 4 years ago when the Lord communicated that he felt neglected because mostly all of his children only came to him when we needed for him to do something that we couldn't do, whether it was personal, whether it was corporate, whether it was national, didn't matter. But it was the same thing in its essence, is that he said, few ever come to me just to be with me. And of course, the classic picture of this is when Mary poured out the oil on Yeshua's feet, and every person in the room had the same response. What a waste. So imagine how God felt. And make a note of these things, perhaps, and sit down afterward and just think about it. To enter in, to understand, to maybe God would let us feel it, how he felt in that moment. Imagine how God felt when the nation said, we don't want to go in. We don't want to go into the promised land. It's crazy. All the miracles that he had done. And then they just said, no, we're not going to go. We look at what he did. He said, okay, you're done. Turn around, go back. But think about how you felt. And then at Mount Sinai, when he's talking to them, they hear his voice and they said, we don't want to hear it. Imagine how he felt when they said, we don't want you to rule over us. the most influential person that I guess was in our life of all of the pastors we sat under was David Wilkerson. And David spoke all the time about how things made God feel. I don't know that I ever heard anybody else share that. And he would be in tears in the pulpit talking about how things made God feel. And if I could give you one thing, if I could leave you with one driving thought and desire, it would be this: to care about how God feels. Isaiah 62, where it says, he says, I won't rest until Jerusalem's a praise in the earth. Just think about that. What if you said to somebody, I can't rest until something's done? What is it going to feel like inside of you? What do you feel like? Okay. Now, God said that about himself. Imagine how he felt. Now, imagine how he feels. When we come to situations and we don't ask him what he thinks about them, and we start to pray and ask him to do things, paying no attention to even ask him, what is he doing? What does it look like to him? At the very least, there's not a connection. He would say, hello, look, can we talk about this? Like, wouldn't you like to know what I think? And we don't ask. And this has been our normal way. We just pray and go, take away all the bad stuff, make everybody feel good, and stop the problems. And okay, that's what we pray. When we come to a meeting, we're coming to God's house to meet with God. It's pretty simple. Imagine sitting down one-on-one with God. What would you do? What would you imagine? Do you imagine us saying, hi, God, it's really good. Listen, I've been wanting to talk to you about, and like you'd go, well, he knows that already. Like he knows all this stuff. Everything I've thought, he knows. Um, he knows everything I'm thinking, but I don't know what he's thinking. So how foolish to fill up the time to tell him everything we're thinking, which he already knows. And then when we're finished telling him what we're thinking, we go, thanks very much. Now it's time to go. Imagine how he feels. Wanting to pour his heart out to us, and we're not listening. We're not asking. And we have a program. We decided 2 weeks ago what the message was going to be on that day, who was going to preach it. And all the songs that we were going to sing, they came in and they decided when it would start, when it went in, and half of the songs we sing that we call worship are about him in the third person as though he's not there. Imagine how he feels in our meetings. So you think about connecting to God's heart and imagining how he felt through all of these times. And he's outside of time, so these feelings are still there in him. And then imagine how he feels in our meetings. Does he really feel seen? Does he really feel welcome? Does he really feel known? Do we really believe that he knows and he sees and he can direct us all? He doesn't need somebody standing up in the front, one person praying for everybody else? How to work that through, what the transition of the form into a new wineskin would be, is a discussion completely in itself, and it's a very back and forth on that. But talking about a wineskin where God feels like, oh, you see me. You're really looking at me. You're really listening. How would he feel if we really paid attention? If we just sat down and said, hey, You know everything. You see everything. You've already done everything. I'm here. I'm here. I'm presenting myself. Whether it's some kind of musical expression that comes out or it's silence. Imagine how he would feel. So Yonine and I celebrated our 55th wedding anniversary a week or so, 2 weeks ago. And we went to this little hotel by the shore here and kind of a little north of Tel Aviv. We went for 4 nights. The first day, they gave us a suite. They just upgraded us. So we had this really nice living room looking out over the sea with sailboats going there. We sat the entire day. We didn't go out of the room because we just got into this intimate focus. And then the last day, the same thing happened. And then last Shabbat, we were sitting here in our house. Lord had us stay home. Started sitting at 9 o'clock. It was so intimate of what he was doing with us, in us. It was 2 o'clock before we could break it enough to go get something to eat. It's a different season, beloved. It's a different dimension. It's a different dynamic. So the reason I thought about our going away was actually Yonit started with having been impressed by a verse. Passage in Isaiah chapter 6. You don't have to turn there, you know it, where Isaiah ends up saying, he's been prophesying for chapters and saying amazing things, and then all of a sudden, woe is me, I'm undone. A man of unclean lips in the midst of a people of unclean lips. And I looked up this word in the Hebrew for undone. And the word is dameh. It's the same word that Elijah hears the still small voice. The still is the same word. And the word means dumb, as in unable to speak. This revelation that shut Isaiah's mouth, where he went quiet, led to the complete cleansing of all of his sin when the coal came from the altar. And you'll need to kind of sit with this and unpack this yourselves to just weigh it and see the implications of all of this. It's not very obtuse. And it so happens that this is the same word. And you just go to a concordance and you'll be able to see it. That describes the unexpected nature of God that Elijah encountered. He saw God for how he was, which was different than how he thought and how everybody else thinks. He just came from slaying all of the prophets and all of the miracles and all of the power. And then there was the earthquake and the wind and the fire. And we look for that. And God shows up in this voice that can't even speak. Psalm 65 says, in the English, praise is awaiting you, O God, in Zion. But the Hebrew has another word in there that's not translated. Tehillah is praise. And then it says there's a modifying word, tehillah dumia, and it's the same word, the same root. It's translated unspeakable praise. Praise that can't be spoken. Here we have in these three situations concerning Elijah's, Isaiah's sin, the nature of God that Elijah experienced the fear of the Lord around, and here it's all the same word, and it has to do. It's silence where you can't speak. And for us, we don't get silence so much, do we? We probably don't have like a real value for it, kind of. And it tends to be uncomfortable, like something's missing, like shouldn't somebody do something? And I'm showing you this to gear you to be able to step into what we believe God is calling for, which we've called outposts of heaven, which is creating dwelling places for God on earth as in heaven. I've spoken about this several times, and I'll never not speak about it. But I speak about it now with a different, with an increased emphasis, urgency, understanding, experience, and call out to you. Don't put this off anymore. If there's much more to say than we're going to go into here. We're putting together a website. Explaining whatever we can to help folks enter into this. But I'll tell you, for 40 days to set aside an hour every day, the same, I never imagined I would do something like this. But in the face of the moment and the seriousness, it became a priority. And everything else, we fit around it. And what I would say is, okay, there was silence in heaven for half an hour. All right, let's give him a half an hour. Let's start with that. And Yeshua said to his three disciples, imagine how he felt when they kept falling asleep. That's another one. He's about going into the deepest, darkest, most stressful moment of his life, and he wants his three friends to sit with him. And they can't do it. And what did he say? Couldn't you sit with me an hour? We had an impression a little while ago, thinking about how God felt in the Holocaust. And realizing it's coming again. It's coming again. And we enter into these moments, these outposts of heaven moments, saying, we're here for you. Even thinking about how he's going to feel in this next unfolding chapter. So some of you know who Rick Winnicke is. He's, Brenda, you've been there. He's done the Fountain of Tears. He did one here in Israel, and there's one at the gates of Auschwitz, which is the picture of, he's put the Holocaust and the crucifixion kind of like on one canvas, right? And Rick is a friend for many years as well. So some of you know Jed and Nicole, who we're very close with. When they were there in outside of Auschwitz with Rick at the Fountain of Tears, Rick shared with them that the Lord said something to him 20 years ago. And he said, next time this happens, I don't want to be alone. And it was exactly what I had heard. And when Jed and Nicole heard this, they told Rick that we had heard the same thing. And Rick said he usually doesn't share it with people. And we've never heard anyone else say it. He never heard anyone else say it, which is a secondary thing, whether anybody else said it or not. But in thinking about God and caring about Him, picture what's about to happen. And he is saying, would you watch with me? Would you sit with me? Would you be with me in this time so I won't go through it? That's the call, beloved. It's not to get anything for ourselves. He's already given us everything we need for life and godliness. It's more than telling him how we feel about him, but it's showing him how much we care about how he feels by just coming to him and saying, we're here. We're here. And take the three scriptures. Tehillah Dumia, the silent, unspeakable praise, and the still small voice. That revelation, I suggest to you, that was what equipped Elijah to not die. The only other person that didn't die was Enoch. And Enoch walked with God. He really saw God. He really knew God. But Elijah, in this very moment, with this unspeakable dynamic there, he saw God as he really was. And in that perception, he went to heaven in a flaming chariot and didn't die. And I'm suggesting that we enter into this space, stepping out of this whole Greek-oriented world of what to produce and this and that. It's a life and death issue, by the way, for us too. Because dwelling in the secret place is the first verse of Psalm 91 that opens the way to all of the protection and promises that follow. If I can ask you to pray, we've just made an investment to buy 10 rugs, like Persian style rugs, and fabric to build a tabernacle of real beauty, to put that out in the street. So, but let me tell you this first. We have a gathering, a Galilee worship gathering that's going from October 15th, basically, to October 24th. The last 3 days, October 21st, 2nd, and 3rd, we will be out in the street, out in the village. And I'm inviting, some of you would join us. We have some spaces left. And the whole gathering will be the preparation in prayer and worship for doing this, presenting the tabernacle of God in the streets of this village that we've been waiting for to do for 20 years. And would anybody like to join us? Is anybody able to join us? you can, if you go to GalileeWorship.com, GalileeWorship.com, it's all the information about these gatherings. First thing, we could use some more people to stand with us in prayer and preparation for this event. And look at the flow of it. We're doing 30 days of waiting before the Lord for an hour. And then from Yom Kippur, from Rosh Hashanah, Yom Teruah to Yom Kippur, we're doing probably 2 hours of worship, an hour, and half an hour of silence, and then an hour and a half of worship, 10 days. And then 5 or whatever days later, we're going out into the street. What a progression of preparation for this. And there's some spaces if some of you would like to be able to and would like to take part in it, be in touch, let me know. And we've had some expenses. At this point, we've put out, for building the tabernacle and buying all the fabric, and everything, we've spent 2,500 pounds today. The Lord let us, Samuel and I went out today and bought it all in one shot. And if anybody would like to sew into that, that would be great. However you could do that through Dovetail, or we have an account. Carolyn Lushington is our representative person that helps us. You could get in touch with her if you wanted to send a contribution and get our British account. It might be easier. Brenda, you have that information. So if you would just ask if anybody wanted to contribute to this tabernacle. Oh, so driving home from Haifa, where we bought everything, the Lord drops this in my spirit. Now, this is a mobile thing. There's 10 gazebos that all packed down, and we put them in our cars and put it on the roof racks with all the instruments, and we have our power sources and the fabric and everything. It's all mobile. And he said, he gave the sense, take it to the army bases. Go to an army base and set it up and invite the soldiers to come in and sit in this heavenly atmosphere. And our dear friend, some of you know, Alexander Dietze, has been going to these army bases and has all the connections with so many bases. And I believe we're going to do this with this tabernacle, of taking it into the field where the soldiers are and setting it up for a couple of days. So if anybody would like to help us and sew into that, that would be great. So become part of an outpost of heaven. Connect to God's heart. And if you'd like to come and be part with us, we'll have another gathering that's coming up the end of November. We'll put the dates out for that. I can tell you what it is actually right now. From November 24th to December 2nd. November 24th to December 2nd will be another gathering. Of course, this one is the Sukkot gathering. That'll be out. We'll go out in the street then too. We're going to do that now with but that's weather permitting. And the weather is that point. Now we're still pretty good with temperature and the likelihood that we want to rain. It gets a little bit iffy then. But mark those dates if you want to come and join us for worship and be part of just this lightning rod here in Israel. So 7:30, 5:30, we're done.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I can see Christine's got her hand up, but maybe we'll end the recording there. Annette, please, and we'll have your question in a minute, but it's